It's hard to say in fictional Wonka world whether creating 5 tickets to your chocolate factory would be something that we could predict would cause kidnappings or mass hysteria or stampedes or anything along those lines.
That gambler from Paraguay made up a phony ticket.
Well, there are so many corporations that have contests, right? All of our fast food chains, other big companies, and everyone wants to participate in contests. So the idea of a contest itself isn't illegal necessarily. I got to assume that on the backside of the Wonka bar or somewhere in the fine print somewhere, there's all of the terms and conditions apply and everything that we would hear in commercials and the fine print on our game pieces for mass contests and things along those lines.
I can't see what it says in the bottom.
The contract that Wonka makes the kids sign is really interesting on 2 levels. First of all, kids can't sign contracts. So just on its basic level, he had the 5 kids sign the contracts. They're not 18 years old. It's not enforceable. Done. That's the end of the analysis on that part of it. Now, as far as the length of the contract goes, if we had the adults or the parents signing those contracts, the argument then is, did they have a chance to read it? Did they have a chance to have legal counsel go over it with them and advise them of all of the terms and conditions of it? And then it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as we get to the end. And this is an interesting area of contract law in our country right now with the terms and conditions that all of us just click accept because we want to get to the next page of the website. So long contracts that people just scroll through and click accept at the end, the big companies are definitely trying to enforce this. And I believe Wonka would try to enforce that. But the arguments there would be, it's so long, they didn't have a chance to read it. It was impossible to read by the time you got to the bottom of the fine print. That's a pretty good argument as to why the contract should be voided, even if an adult signed it.
You've ruined your watershed, Wonka. It's polluted.
I think Wonka's responsible for every single bout of food poisoning that comes across him. From a legal food service standpoint, you almost have to nuke that entire room from orbit and just be done with it to move forward. I mean, every single thing that they touched wouldn't be able to be touched by anybody else going forward. So I hope that that room was just a display and that he disintegrated everything afterward, but knowing what happens with the river and everything else, it's probably just all contaminated, gross, disgusting handled food that is also sitting out without refrigeration or without any sort of storage or anything along those lines. So we could see a class action for all of those people. We could see liability for that. Or it could be the handful of people who found out after the fact that they were eating an Augustus bar and then were traumatized about it and didn't want to have a bar that a 13-year-old swam in. I will say that I am happy to argue that the getting out of a verbal promise with a 13-year-old pinky swear by crossing your fingers absolutely gets you out of any contract that a 13-year-old would enter into verbally. I'm happy to make that argument all day, every day. And I would win because they're 13 and they can't enter into a contract anyway. I don't know that we get to the level of kidnapping with Oompa Loompas, because there's an idea here that he gave them asylum in some way, shape, or form. Here in California, I can't even hire a legal intern without paying them and compensating for their time. Unless they're getting college credit, we're not allowed to have employees just for free or for service or anything along those lines. So the idea that the Oompa Loompas are getting room and board but not getting compensated for their actual time is a huge problem with labor laws and everything else. The first thing that I can't quite get past when we do a criminal analysis of the police raiding Wonka's factory and questioning why there's 200 Oompa Loompas there is the song that they would sing. I mean, what is the Oompa Loompa song for the police are here and we need to be free? But they're gonna ask whether they're there against their will or not against their will. I mean, it certainly seems like they're happily working and going through the process. I mean, all joking aside, it doesn't seem like he's mistreating them or keeping them there against their will. The Oompa Loompa workforce would probably get an amazing labor law class action attorney to file them for not getting breaks, not getting time off, not being paid correctly, and that would put Wonka out of business permanently. This concept of attractive nuisance means that somebody in a negligent way puts something that would encourage someone to go into a dangerous area. So that's basically the entire chocolate factory. So if I'm the lawyer that's suing Wonka, I'm gonna argue that they didn't put up good signs, they didn't put up good railings, that they didn't do enough things to stop someone stupid from going into a dangerous area. And that's the attractive nuisance law, and that's all of the liability issues that he would have for creating a situation where the kids could even jump in the river without any stop, or could get up to the place where they lay the golden eggs and fall through the chute. The fact that he didn't put enough railings and safety measures in place would absolutely subject him to liability for that.
They won't really be burned in the furnace, will they?
So the law about a death in a business is homicide. I mean, it's unlawful death of another person. And so typically we talk about them in two different phases. We talk about them in manslaughter versus murder. Murder is an intentional killing with some sort of an evil thought, where manslaughter can be a negligent act that ends up with someone dying. So when Wonka creates a situation in his factory that's unsafe, or fails to stop a kid from going into a dangerous place, or any of the things that happen to these 4 other kids, or if Charlie and Grandpa Joe had gotten stuck in the fan and had died, all of that would be an allegation of negligence that resulted in a death of a person, and that's manslaughter.
It happens every time. They all become blueberries.
It is a dark path to go down to suggest that Wonka just let the nasty kids go into those situations intentionally. But if we had some sort of, I don't know, journal, text messages, something along those lines these days, where it indicated that, yeah, I can't wait for her to go down the chute with the golden goose and go to the incinerator because she's been rude to me all day, then yeah, that's a little bit more of an intentional act at that point. And there's 2 different parts of the analysis. It's intentional, and so that might constitute malice, but there's also another legal principle where you create such an inherent dangerous situation with a complete reckless disregard for the lives of others that you can be guilty of the higher levels of homicide. You can be guilty of murder. So for example, if I fire a gun into a crowd, I might not be technically intending to kill anybody, but it's so reckless, with a complete reckless disregard for life, that I will be charged with murder for that. So Wonka, if he intended to kill off each one of those first 4 kids, could be looking at some very serious criminal charges.
So the factory's yours, Charlie. You can move in immediately.
Legally speaking, there's nothing that stops someone from giving a company to a kid. We have people all across the country and all throughout history that give their businesses to their children in some way. A 13-year-old isn't going to be running a company, though. A 13-year-old doesn't have legal capacity of ownership, of contract signing, of all of the other things that adults have. So if we were to apply this to today, what you would probably see is some sort of a trustee, someone who would be in charge for purposes of making sure that the company was well taken care of until Charlie came of age.
I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen.
So you think about the glass elevator, and you think about Wonka's attitude about it, and how he's just delighting in the fact that everyone's scared, which is all fun and games until, you know, what if Grandpa Joe had a heart attack or something along those lines because of the fear that he was being placed under? And there are causes of action where people can sue for intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's almost only seen in law school exams. I mean, there are attorneys that will sue for that. It's almost a joke in the legal circle that this is the thing that you sue when you can't find anything else. Sorry, attorneys, but that's the reality of the situation. If you can't find anything else, sue for intentional infliction of emotional distress. But in that elevator, Grandpa Joe is absolutely scared out of his mind, and so is Charlie. I would be less worried about Charlie in that moment because a kid can absorb more of that adrenaline, more of that fear. But Grandpa Joe was just laying in bed like the day before, just barely started walking again. And then we put him in mortal fear for his life, thinking he's gonna be ripped to shreds. I mean, this is potentially, is this the first drone? Is this the first, privately owned, aircraft that goes up in the air? There are all kinds of regulations for aircraft. I mean, it's the reason why we don't have flying cars yet, because we can't just have everybody randomly just popping off into the air. So it's the least part of his problems, but sure, he's also probably violated FAA regulations on airspace use and everything else.
I can't go on forever, and I don't really want to try.
I don't think the chocolate factory goes out of business. I think that they pay out each one of the families a significant amount of money, and not enough that it runs the company out of business at all. I think that this is no different than a large corporation that has an issue, has a scandal, has a damage. It almost never causes that big corporation to go out of business. There's insurance in place, there's money to pay off the people so that they're compensated in some way for whatever damages they had. I think about Violet and getting squeezed, or TV Mike and however they had to stretch him in the taffy puller in order to get him back to size. They're probably gonna get more of the money unless the other kids got incinerated. But I do believe that it's a situation where there would be payouts, and then they would move forward and Charlie would have his chocolate factory. At least that's what I want to believe, because I want to believe that the chocolate factory still exists after the end of the movie.
Forgive me for putting you through this, please.
From a business perspective, I should absolutely, every day of the week, bring in Wonka as a client. My family would really appreciate it, because he would just be a constant source of legal work and revenue. I would hire a fleet of lawyers to deal with everything that he has to do on a regular basis. From a moral perspective, it's really hard to work with clients who have a very different compass, who have a very different way of viewing the world, and a very different way of seeing dangers and seeing risks and all that. He's eccentric, he's strange, but he's reckless, and it is very difficult to advise someone like that and have them ignore your advice and then still go through and make really bad decisions. I don't know, there's probably a kid in me though that would have to say, yes, I would represent Willy Wonka.
Adieu. Parting is such sweet sorrow.